If all goes well, the New Orleans Saints could have one of the top running back rooms in the NFL. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and you can continue the conversation over on Subtext at subtext.com/LockedOnSaints. A little bit of one-on-one with me because I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints. You can find me every Tuesday on the Locked On NFL podcast and here with you every single Monday through Friday and then some on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be doing our usual Friday segment as we're out of the draft now. We can get back to our usual programming. In case you missed it, going to get you caught up with all the injury updates that you need to know, as well as, of course, the new faces that have joined the New Orleans Saints offseason roster. But we're going to start off today's episode taking a look at Jamaal Williams and Kendre Miller and how both of them are looking at changing their game in 2023 and how the New Orleans Saints, because of that, could walk away with one of the best running back rooms in the NFL in this season. So I want to start off with Kendre Miller here because he's the newest part of the equation, although he and Jamaal Williams are both quote-unquote rookies to the New Orleans Saints offense. This will be their first year for the both of them. However, Kendre Miller's the more recent example, and Kendre Miller's comments have kind of been igniting the fan base a little bit, both in positive and in negative ways. I'm going to tell you right now, confidence undoubtedly is a good thing, and Kendre Miller has a lot of it. The third round selection for the New Orleans Saints in this year's draft, the former running back out of TCU, he had 1,399 rushing yards last year, along with 17 rushing touchdowns, 26 catches in addition, converting some of those third and longs over the course of his time over at TCU as a whole. Shows you that he didn't really get too involved in the passing game. But the big thing that he's working on over the course of this offseason is improving in exactly that. And if he does that, it ends up allowing him to do what it is that he feels he wants to do, which is push Alvin Kamara. He wants to challenge Alvin Kamara. He is coming for that number one spot, as he said during his WWL interview over on the radio right after he was drafted. He's recently also said that he believes that he can do very much or be very much the same thing as Alvin Kamara in the NFL. And that's exactly what you want to be hearing from this guy, who's only 20 years old, by the way. He was one of the youngest draft prospects in this year's draft class. So the idea of him evolving, the idea of him developing and getting better should not be a surprise at all, and certainly isn't something that we should look at and put a ceiling on at this time. You remember earlier on in the draft process, one of the big knocks on Hendon Hooker, the Tennessee Volunteers quarterback, now Detroit Lions quarterback, was that he was too old, 25, and that he wouldn't be able to develop. He's already reached his ceiling, was a lot of the concern, a concern that I very much disagree with. But for a running back, there's not that much of a ceiling. And on top of that, you add in the fact that when the season starts, he'll only be 21 years old, 8 years the senior, or really rather the junior of guys like Jamaal Williams and Alvin Kamara. Kendre Miller has a lot of opportunity and a lot of green grass in front of him, and certainly he'll be looking for a lot of green grass in front of him to start off the season. I mentioned yesterday 5 of the most interesting games for the New Orleans Saints in 2023. And one of the games that I mentioned, I believe was actually number 2 on my list, was the Tennessee Titans game. And one of the reasons why I mentioned the Tennessee Titans game is, of course, you get the Tyjae Spears revenge factor, right? The Saints at 71 were on the board. Tyjae Spears was right there, the hometown kid, and they passed on him to select Kendre Miller. And so this ends up being a narrative that we'll watch from the Tyjae Spears angle. But don't get it twisted. There's a Kendre Miller angle here too, because he wants to be able to prove that the Saints made the right decision. Now, will he be able to get many snaps during his first possible game of his career? We don't know. That kind of depends upon what happens with Alvin Kamara in his trial at the end of July. If Alvin Kamara is suspended to open up the season, then Kendre Miller is going to get a lot of opportunity. If Alvin Kamara doesn't get suspended, then maybe that puts a cap on how Kendre Miller may or may not impact a game early on in his career. But right now, Kendre Miller is doing everything that he can to make sure that he can still get out on the field. His ability to be able to run between the tackles, his ability to be able to get outside and attack the perimeter, turn the corner, and of course, his one-cut ability are all things that are going to make him a valuable option for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to their run game as the season progresses, especially if and when Alvin Kamara misses games. But if he's able to add a little bit more to his pass-catching sort of outlook, then all of a sudden, everything could potentially change, and Kendre Miller could be in a situation where he gets a lot more opportunity earlier on in the season. Nick Underhill over at NewOrleans.football recently reported that one of the things that Kendre Miller is working on over the course of the offseason, one of his goals, is to get better as a route runner. Now, that's going to be very interesting to watch because he'll get those opportunities in camp. He'll be able to run routes out of the backfield. I'm sure that they'll also motion him out wide, and he'll get some opportunities there as well. But it's going to be what he can do out of the backfield that's most important, right? You've got teams like the Atlanta Falcons and the Detroit Lions who are lying to you over and over again. They drafted running backs in the first round. They're trying to make you believe that they're going to use them as more than running backs because that makes them feel better about the fact that they spent a first round pick on one of the NFL's most expendable positions. And that's fine. They can go on and they can lie and they can do everything that they want. Oh yeah, well, we're lining them out wide. We're trying them out in the slot, whatever. They're going to be running backs for you, Jahmyr Gibbs, as well as, of course, Bijan Robinson. Deal with it. It's okay. Luke Braun and I went into this whole thing about it in Tuesday's Locked On NFL. But when you're the New Orleans Saints, you don't have to do that. You don't have to shade what it is that you're doing with Kendre Miller. The idea with Kendre Miller is that hopefully he becomes a workhorse back for you over the course of the time that he has here in New Orleans, especially considering the age gap between him and the guys that are ahead of him, and Alvin Kamara and Jamaal Williams. But if he can go out there and he can evolve as a route runner, if he can go out there and he can show you what he can do more consistently as a pass catcher with more pass catching opportunities, which will of course present themselves in this New Orleans Saints offense, then all of a sudden Kendre Miller becomes a little hard to keep off the field. Not to the point where you're stealing snaps away from Alvin Kamara, but the rotation between the three gets a little bit more frequent. And I think that that's something that the New Orleans Saints could absolutely use. Remember, they won a Super Bowl having three backs that they could go to between Reggie Bush, Mike Bell, and then, of course, the one and only Pierre Thomas, who wasn't the highest drafted player. He wasn't the first round selection or anything like that, but he might have been the namesake for the New Orleans Saints several times throughout that 2009 run. So when you look at Kendre Miller and where it is that he'll be able to impact the game, it's going to take him adding a little bit of Pierre Thomas to his game. He doesn't necessarily have to add Alvin Kamara to his game. But if he can add a little bit of Pierre Thomas, then all of a sudden he becomes your primary option opposite Alvin Kamara in the passing game out of the backfield while Jamaal Williams bowls over people and turns corners. That's not a bad place to be. But don't get it twisted that Kendre Miller is the only one trying to improve in the passing game to get ready for this 2023 New Orleans Saints offense. Jamaal Williams is doing the very same. And Jamaal Williams is doing it in ways that show you that he is ready to impress in 2023. Let's get to Jamaal Williams now as we take a look at the New Orleans Saints running back room here in or ahead of the 2023 season on today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by Built Bar, going from the potential of having one of the best running back rooms in the NFL to the definitive best protein bar in all the world. That's the way that we do it here on Locked On Saints. And Built Bar, of course, is a huge part of what we are doing here. And you should go and check them out. Built.com, where you can see all of the outstanding flavors that they have. 17, 18 grams of protein, but that sugar is only coming in at around 4 or 5 grams. You're talking about calories of around 130, 140. That's not bad at all. That's better than the candy bars that you might be eating. And you can get the same flavor with Built Bar, but get the protein that you need to get through your day as well and instead. Pre-workout, post-workout, need a snack to help you so that you're not dragging at 3 p.m. in the middle of the day. Built Bar is the way to go. You can head over to Built.com to see their entire selection, including all their limited edition flavors, which do go quickly, so make sure you go and check that out. But if you're near a Walmart, head over to the pharmacy section for a 4-bar box of some of the great flavors that they have. And you can also head over to Sam's Club for that big 13-bar box. You want to buy it in bulk over at Sam's Club. 13-bar box of Churro Puff and Brownie Batter Puff, 2 of their elite flavors as well. So go check them out today at Built.com, Walmart, or Sam's Club. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Make sure you join us for our live show, whether you catch it live or later on today over on the Locked On Saints YouTube page, or wherever you get your podcast. We'll be talking about defensive tackle, Ohio State Buckeyes defensive tackle, Jerron Cage, the undrafted free agent that was joined the New Orleans Saints this offseason. Does he have a path to the roster? How could he potentially separate himself? And what does the rest of that defensive tackle room look like? So we'll get to all of that later on today. But first off, and the other question for that is, who will be the Saints' next double-digit sack player? Because the Saints, outside of Trey Hendrickson and Junior Gillette, you got Cam Jordan over the last decade and a half. So who's the guy after that? So we're going to be taking a look at that as well. As we continue on with today's episode, we broke down Kendre Miller and sort of how he's wanting to improve as a route runner, how it is that he can get more involved in this offense sooner rather than later, how important game one is for him. Well, there's a game that's really important on the schedule for another addition to the New Orleans Saints running back room this offseason. Last year's NFL rushing touchdowns leader, Jamaal Williams. Jamaal Williams will play against, first of all, his first former team, the Green Bay Packers, in Week 3 in Green Bay. But then later on in the season, 10 weeks later, Week 13, he'll take on his most recent former team, the Detroit Lions, who he told us during his introductory press conference he felt that the negotiations that took place between him and the Detroit Lions were, quote, disrespectful. So I bet he's carrying a little bit of that into that matchup later on in the season. The thing about Jamaal Williams that I want to highlight, though, is that his goal, his intent this season is to prove everyone wrong. He wants to impress, but he wants to prove everyone wrong. And when I say prove everyone wrong, what he's talking about when he says that is there's a lot of assumption that he's a goal line running back only, which is so interesting because no one said that about Alvin Kamara 2017, 2018, even though the overwhelming majority of the touchdowns that he scored those seasons were also in the red zone. In fact, all but maybe 2 or 3 in 2018 were all from the red zone, and it was a great season for him. Now, when we look at Jamaal Williams, we tend to look at, 16 out of his 17, rushing touchdowns all came from within the red zone. That's pretty akin to what you saw numbers-wise with Alvin Kamara early on in his career as well. Surprise, surprise, teams use their running backs in the red zone. Shocker. Not every touchdown has to be a 40-yard dash. Not every touchdown has to be a 60-yard breakaway run. Are they fun? Yes, sure, of course they are. But that's just simply not the way that the NFL game is played. You see that in the passing game a ton. This is one of the reasons why I'm not actually all that upset if the New Orleans Saints finish in the halfway point in 2023 when it comes to stopping the run and rushing yardage, because rushing yards don't necessarily put points on the board. You have to keep teams from getting into scoring position, and a big part of that is taking away the passing game. That becomes most important. I'll take a step back from that. When you look at Jamaal Williams, though, the thing that he gives you is your ability to be able to extend drives. There is a benefit to his short yardage game, but he doesn't want to be known just for what he can do in terms of the short yardage game. You can give him the ball between the 20s. You can throw the ball to him. You can do all of these things, especially if you think back to his Green Bay Packers years, where he was asked to do something very different than what he was asked to do in Detroit. He was a little bit more of the change of pace guy along with Aaron Jones at the time, as a pass catcher out of the backfield. I think he was averaging around 30 catches per season during those years. And I know that's not the same as Alvin Kamara catching 82, but you don't need another Alvin Kamara. You still have Alvin Kamara. Much like with Kendre Miller, it's not necessarily that he needs to be Alvin Kamara, but if he adds some Pierre Thomas to his game, then all of a sudden he's taken off. Jamaal Williams does not have to come to New Orleans and be Reggie Bush. Jamaal Williams can come to New Orleans and be Jamaal Williams. And there's going to be some value that's added there. Now, he's going to get a lot of opportunities, and the Saints aren't going to just run him in between the tackles. They'll try to get him outside. They'll try to get him involved in the passing game as well. But for Jamaal Williams, if he's looking to impress in 2023, all he needs to do is find the end zone. Doesn't matter if that comes on a screen pass, a swing pass, the pass out to the flats. Doesn't matter if that's a 50-yard touchdown, a 60-yard touchdown. Doesn't matter if that's a 2-yard touchdown or a 1-yard touchdown. If he finds the end zone, That's going to be the thing that's going to help to put the Saints over the top. The Saints struggled to get into scoring distance last year, and they also struggled to score when in scoring distance last year. Jamaal Williams helped you alleviate that. Jamaal Williams also helped you to not have to run Alvin Kamara between the tackles game in and game out, to the point to where when you get down to the red zone, he's already been beat to a pulp. And then you try to swing some passes out to him and things like that. That didn't help the Saints last year. Having to run Alvin Kamara as their bell cow back between the backfield between the tackles, took away from what it is that they would usually try to do with him. So Jamaal Williams provides you the player that you need to be able to stay on the field, which has been an issue for running backs around Alvin Kamara here as of late. Kendre Miller gives you an insurance policy there, but also somebody that can stay on the field and be there when you don't want to run Alvin Kamara between the tackles 26 times in a game. And instead, you want to be able to get him outside. You want to be able to get him in space. You want to be able to utilize him in the passing game. Well, now you have the ability to do that without losing production in your run game because you have other running backs to fall back on. So Jamaal Williams, who's catching 1,000 passes a day, 4 days a week, that's doing 1,500 push-ups or whatever it is, that's doing all of these incredible workouts over the course of the offseason, he wants to come in and show you that he can be more than just a short distance back. And now he'll have the opportunity to do that because this offense is going to ask more of him than the Detroit Lions offense does. But even if he fails, in the slim chance, even if he fails to consistently add as a pass catcher, consistently add as an outside zone runner or a sweep runner or anything like that, if he's finding his way to the end zone between the tackles or otherwise, in those short distance situations, if he's picking up 3rd and 1s for you, if he's picking up 2nd and 1s for you, he is adding value to this New Orleans Saints team that they didn't have before, because they can finally rely on somebody else to do it instead of asking Alvin Kamara to do it all. And then instead, they can specify the role for Alvin Kamara, which could be helpful for the New Orleans Saints if they end up losing Alvin Kamara later on down the year, because then they'll have built out a routine of sort of the specificities around how they want to utilize Alvin Kamara. And maybe that's where Kendre Miller comes in and contributes. Maybe that's where Eno Benjamin comes in and contributes. The thing that I love so much about this running back room, before we get to in case you missed it, I'm not going to mention who this was. This running back is no longer on the team. It's not there. It's not Eno Benjamin, anything like that. So I don't mind telling this story. And also it was during a press conference in the locker room, so the video is probably out there anyway. But there was a running back that I was talking to last year that showed up in New Orleans, and I asked, what does the pairing of you and Alvin Kamara look like to you? Like, what's the ceiling on that? And the response that I got was, well, I don't really look at us as a pairing. Alvin Kamara is the top guy. I'm just here to help support where I can. That's fine. That's fine. But that just goes to show you how much pressure was on Alvin Kamara and sort of the clear lack of willingness in some cases to take some responsibility off of Alvin Kamara and let Alvin Kamara be what he needs to be as a satellite back for this New Orleans Saints team. And I use satellite back loosely. He's way more than just a satellite back in the NFL. We know that, but you understand what I'm saying. Now you have two guys that are coming in that are intent on getting snaps, intent on winning games, intent on proving their value, and therefore take some of the pressure off of Alvin Kamara. So instead of someone passing the buck and saying, well, really, this is Alvin Kamara's team, you now have three guys saying, I'm a part of this team. We're a part of this unit and we'll help this team win. And that's a really, really, really good place to be and a vast improvement from where New Orleans and Alvin Kamara has been over the course of the last couple of years, with the exception of Mark Ingram. Who wanted to be that guy that he was in 2017, 2018. He wanted to be that guy again in 2021 and 2022, but unfortunately just couldn't stay healthy to do it. So Mark Ingram, not a part of that conversation. But now you look at these other guys that are there, Jamaal Williams and Kendre Miller, who want to contribute themselves, who want to complement Alvin Kamara. And that's why the New Orleans Saints could have the best, if not at least one of the best running back rooms this year in the NFL. Coming up next, in case you missed it, get you your injury updates. How soon should you expect to see Kendre Miller out on the field? We'll take a look at him, Foster Moreau, and of course, Michael Thomas, and then get you introduced to some of the new faces, get you all caught up with all the biggest stories from around the New Orleans Saints from this week. Got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at our usual Friday staple now that we're getting back into the swing of things here post-draft. And our In Case You Missed It segment, which we do every Friday. Just getting you caught up with all the biggest stories from around the New Orleans Saints from that week that you need to know. I'm going back a little bit further here because we didn't do this last week. So, of course, in case you missed it, Foster Moreau is now a New Orleans Saint. And not only is he now a New Orleans Saint, but he has been cleared to play. There are a lot of folks in places that are saying that Foster Moreau is not going to play in 2023, that Foster Moreau is not going to be available in 2023. Let me be very, very clear with you. Barring unforeseen circumstances, that assumption is blatantly incorrect. And it is blatantly inconsistent with what we all are being told by literally everyone. Mickey Loomis, Dennis Allen, Foster Moreau himself, people around Foster Moreau that we have spoken to. Literally everyone is on the same page here that Foster Moreau is expected to be available and on the field for the Saints in 2023. You're hearing a lot of things around, and you've heard this from me because I was told this as well, that Foster Moreau may be on the field next week at OTAs, that Foster Moreau is expected to be on the field in training camp. I think both of those things are probably accurate, but the degree to which his participation will be remains shrouded. That remains a mystery for the time. But the expectation is that week 1 in the fall, he will be available and on the field for the New Orleans Saints and their offense. Now, we should be very, very clear. This is a Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis. This is a cancer diagnosis. Things can go anywhere at any time. Okay? So things can change. But right now, the expectation is very much that he will be on the field to begin the season. And not only begin the season, but be on the field in training camp. Next up, when he does hit the field, he will not be wearing the number 87, at least for now. He is now back in number 82, which of course is a number that was opened up with the trade of Adam Trautman, which sent him back to Sean Payton over with the Denver Broncos. 82 was the number that he wore in Mid-City at Jesuit High School. So he comes back to the city of New Orleans and gets to wear the same number in the pros that he wore in high school in 82. Pretty cool. 87 was his number that he wore over at Las Vegas or over with the Raiders. That, of course, is currently taken by Lucas Krull. So I think that as of right now, we'll see him in 82. Remember, numbers don't really become super official until after all of the preseason cuts are made and the season begins. So the number could still change. He wore 84, and of course, the number 18 at LSU. Maybe something happens with those numbers. Maybe something happens and 87 opens up, but 82 for now is the number. Along with Foster Moreau, as we've been talking about running backs all day today, Kendre Miller, expected to be good to go for training camp. Not expected to really be super involved in OTAs, okay? So when we get to OTAs on Tuesday for the next 3 weeks, and you're not hearing things about how great Kendre Miller looked, don't be surprised by that. The expectation is that he will be very limited when it comes to OTAs so that he's ready to go for when it most matters in training camp. Him being present at OTAs is going to be great for New Orleans because it puts them and Kendre Miller in a place to where they're learning the language. And that becomes the great thing about OTAs is that you get to learn the language, learn the shorthand, learn everything that you're doing before you go to start executing it and installing it in training camp. So you're not picking up language and learning language in training camp. So as long as he's around, fantastic for New Orleans. Similarly, wide receiver Michael Thomas, also expected to be good to go in camp. Had hardware removed from his foot that was updated by Dennis Allen on the Rich Eisen show. We spoke with both Dennis Allen and Mickey Loomis at the Saints Hall of Fame Golf Classic, and Mike Triplett over at New Orleans Football did a great job not acknowledging, but clarifying with Mickey Loomis that him getting that hardware removed was part of the plan and that it happened when it was supposed to happen. And that was confirmed by Mickey Loomis. So everything is on schedule for Michael Thomas, and the expectation is that he'll be good to go for camp and hopefully good to go for as much of the 2023 season as possible. Couple of new faces for you here in New Orleans. James Washington, the former, most recently Dallas Cowboy, but probably most notably Pittsburgh Steeler. Now here in New Orleans, the Saints brought him in for a tryout, signed him. They have loaded up that wide receiver room to make sure that they have every option available of every style. I think the things that separate James Washington from the rest doesn't necessarily separate him from Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed in that he is a deep threat, right? He's a field stretching type of guy. But the thing that does separate him a little bit from some of those guys, particularly Chris Olave more than Rashid Shaheed, though, is that he's a bit of a yards after catch threat, turns into a running back with the ball in his hands, 5'11", 215-ish pounds, type of guy that can run over a safety if you needed him to, type of guy that can get shifty and get around a linebacker if you needed him to, all of that. So he's one of those guys that you would be looking at to say, okay, is he a player that can contribute in the short and intermediate areas while also being a deep threat and be able to extend some plays? His average yards after catch each game or throughout his career has been 4.1 yards. So that means a 6-yard pass can turn into a first down with James Washington. A 16-yard pass turns into an explosive 20-yard catch and run for the wide receiver. So that's a good place to be if you're the New Orleans Saints offense. The other thing that I think that helps to separate him as well, 44.7, if I remember correctly, was his contested catch rate. At his best, he was over 56% one season. That's great. That's another thing that the New Orleans Saints are absolutely looking for. They also brought in swing tackle Scott Lashley. Now, I'm calling him a swing tackle for now, but we'll see exactly what his role is in New Orleans. When he was with the Alabama Crimson Tide before he transferred over to Mississippi State in 2021, played on both sides of the line, a little bit of left tackle, a little bit of right tackle. Then when he got to Mississippi State, settled in, played at right tackle there, was their starter there. Now he hasn't gotten much opportunity in the NFL. Now he might get his shot. If nothing else, he gives you somebody to be able to plug in along with Landon Young at right tackle to allow Ryan Ramczyk some rest throughout training camp to make sure he's in tip-top shape to open up the season. Saints also went and added to the interior defensive line over on the opposite side by bringing in Jack Heflin, the former, he was a Green Bay Packer for a little while, only appeared in like 5 or 6 games throughout his NFL career, who played all 12 games with the Houston Roughnecks last year in the XFL, 25 total tackles, added a sack, and I believe he had 3 or 5 tackles for a loss as well. So you saw a little bit of the production there in terms of him being able to be a little disruptive at the XFL level. Now we'll see what he can do with the New Orleans Saints. And finally, I just want to add in here that Saints quarterback coach and passing game coordinator Ronald Curry was selected for the NFL's Coach Accelerator program. This is his first year there, which is really, really cool. Former New Orleans Saints co-defensive coordinator is doing his second year there, and that's Chris Richard, but Ronald Curry currently on the Saints staff getting that opportunity. Ronald Curry is somebody that has been seen as a rising star within NFL circles for a long time, for the past few years. You're seeing that. Tampa Bay Buccaneers interviewed him for their open offensive coordinator position. Denver Broncos did the same thing over in Denver, and there's an expectation that maybe he could potentially continue to move up here in New Orleans. Came in as a guy working with the wide receivers, then started working with quarterbacks, became the quarterbacks coach, now is passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach, got that promotion last year. And so now is there the potential that he moves into offensive coordinator should Pete Carmichael call it quits within the next couple of years, or should the Saints move on from Pete Carmichael if things don't go well this season? There is absolutely an opportunity for Ronald Curry to continue to develop here in New Orleans, but no matter what, he'll continue to move up the ladder somewhere in the NFL because it's clear that the NFL looks at him the same way that the New Orleans Saints look at him as well. I want to give a shout out to a couple of really cool things that have been going on. Drew Brees bringing a new festival here to New Orleans, the Pickleball Festival. So that sounds pretty dope. You've got some great community stuff going on. Kirk Merritt doing a food drive to benefit Second Harvest Food Bank to help feed South Louisiana at his former high school at Destrehan High School before their spring game against Edna Carr. Just really cool stuff happening all over the place from these New Orleans Saints that continue to find ways to contribute to their communities and become bigger parts of what's going on around around the city of New Orleans. We saw Rashid Shaheed doing some stuff here recently, all of that as well. So really, really cool to see all of that. So that should catch you up on all the biggest stories around the New Orleans Saints here for the past, I'll say week and a half, because kind of, like I said, I went back a little bit further. Coming up later on tonight, Jerron Cage, we're going to be taking a look at the UDFA defensive tackle. Who will be the next New Orleans Saint to pile on double-digit sacks? Who can you put your money on there, or who should we put our money on there? And of course, a look at the rest of the defensive line as a whole, where they could continue to address. So as always, y'all, thank you so much for making me your first listen of the day every day. Remember, you can continue the conversation at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints. Thanks so much, as always, making me part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi, especially if you're out at Bayou Boogaloo this weekend. Make sure you say what's up. And as always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter, Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.